The coffee hit the marble floor at 7:15 on a Tuesday morning. Marcus Kane was on his knees before the liquid stopped spreading, before the porcelain shards settled into their final resting places. Above him, Victoria Ashford adjusted her Armani blazer without breaking stride, her Louboutin heels clicking a rhythm that said she'd already forgotten he existed. Clean it again. Do it right this time. The words hung in the air like cigarette smoke in a closed room. Marcus wrung out the mob in his work shirt pulled tight across his chest. Beneath the thin navy fabric, something dark stretched from shoulder to shoulder. Wings, large and deliberate, the kind of ink that spoke of oaths and broken promises. Sophie Chen stopped mid-stride, her tablet nearly slipping from her hands. She turned back, whispering just loud enough for the sound to carry. "Ma'am, did you see his chest? That looked like—" Victoria pivoted on one heel, her gaze dropping to the man still kneeling on the expensive Italian stone. For half a second, something flickered behind her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or its ghost. Then her face reset to its default setting. Ice over steel. Who the hell is he? Sophie opened her mouth, closed it, checked her tablet as if the answer might materialize there. New custodial assignment. Started 3 weeks ago. Marcus Kane. Victoria's jaw tightened. She turned away without another word, disappearing into the executive corridor where the air smelled like leather and old money and coffee that cost more than Marcus's weekly grocery bill. Marcus stood slowly, joints protesting in the way they always did now at 38. He lifted the mop bucket, wheeled his cart toward the service elevator, and didn't look back. He'd learned not to look back. The apartment was dark when his alarm went off at 5:45. Marcus moved through the two-bedroom unit in East Boston without turning on lights, muscle memory guiding him past furniture that had been cheap when he bought it 6 years ago and hadn't improved with age. The building super kept promising to fix the heat. Marcus had stopped asking. He made pancakes the way Rebecca used to make them, with cinnamon folded into the batter, and just enough vanilla extract to make the kitchen smell like something other than resignation. Ethan's door opened at 6:15 exactly. The boy had inherited his father's internal clock, along with his mother's blue eyes, and the ability to go very still when emotions threatened to overflow. Ethan sat at the small table by the window, backpack already packed, school uniform laid out with the precision of someone who'd learned early that chaos had consequences. He was 11 now, small for his age, but growing into the kind of quiet strength that didn't need volume to make itself known. "Dad, why don't you work at the hospital anymore?" Marcus's hands stilled on his coffee cup. The question wasn't new, but it landed differently each time. A stone thrown into water, ripples spreading in patterns he couldn't predict. "I work where I need to work. Tommy's dad is a doctor. He says doctors make lots of money." Marcus set down the cup, turned to face his son fully. The morning light through the window caught Ethan's profile, so much of Rebecca there that sometimes it hurt to breathe. "Money isn't everything, buddy." Ethan frowned, pushing scrambled eggs around his plate with the kind of careful attention that meant he was thinking hard about something. "Then what is?" Marcus knelt beside the chair, bringing himself eye level with the boy who'd lost too much too young. "Being here with you, walking you to school, making this breakfast, hearing about your spelling test and the kid who can do backflips and that art project starting next week. Those are the things money can't buy, Ethan." The boy nodded slowly, like he was trying the answer on for size and finding it didn't quite fit. "But the kids at school, they say you do a job that doesn't matter." Marcus felt something crack open in his chest, not anger gaily, but its sharper cousin. He kept his voice level, kept his hands steady on his son's shoulders. "There's no such thing as a job that doesn't matter. Only people who don't understand the difference between price and value. You hear me?" Ethan nodded again, more certain this time. "I hear you." They walked 6 blocks to Riverside Elementary in the October cold, Ethan's backpack too big for his frame, but carried without complaint. Other parents passed them, mothers in business suits checking phones, fathers in expensive workout gear, rushing toward yoga classes or whatever it was people with money did before 8 a.m. None of them looked at the man in the janitor's uniform. Marcus had stopped expecting them to. At the school gate, Ethan turned around, adjusting his backpack straps with both hands. "See you later, Dad. See you later, buddy." Marcus stood there longer than necessary, watching until his son disappeared through the double doors and into the fluorescent-lit hallways where childhood happened in measured increments. Other parents hurried past. Nobody spoke to him. In 3 years of morning drop-offs, nobody ever had. The walk back felt longer than the walk there. It always did. Inside the apartment, Marcus showered in water that never quite got hot enough, dressed in his work clothes, and checked that the door was locked twice. A habit born from the year after Rebecca died, when he'd convinced himself that if he could just control the small things, maybe the universe would stop taking the big ones. On the hallway table, a framed photograph sat facing the wall. He'd placed it there the day they moved in. Turning it around felt like opening a wound that had finally stopped bleeding. His wallet held $43, a public library card, and one photograph tucked behind a worn $5 bill. Marcus didn't take it out, hadn't looked at it in months, but he knew every detail. Rebecca in her white hospital coat, him younger and still believing the world made sense, and behind them, blurred but readable, St. Augustine Children's Hospital. The reassignment notice had come on a Wednesday, delivered by Rick Morrison, a supervisor who'd worked custodial for 26 years and wore his resignation to fate like a second skin. Higher pay, 50 cents more per hour, which translated to an extra $80 a month if Marcus picked up the maximum shifts. He took the assignment without questions. Questions implied choices, and choices implied freedom, and Marcus had learned the difference between all three. The 14th floor smelled different. Leather and lavassa and perfume that cost more than his rent. Carpets so thick it swallowed footsteps. Windows that actually opened. Marcus arrived at 6 a.m. before the executives, before the assistants, before anyone who might notice him. He emptied trash cans, vacuumed in careful rows, wiped down conference tables with the kind of precision that had once been second nature in operating rooms. Different tools, same discipline. Victoria Ashford's office sat at the end of the hall, mahogany door, brass nameplate, the kind of silence that money bought and power reinforced. For 2 weeks, Marcus cleaned around her schedule like water flowing around stone. She arrived after he finished. She left after he'd gone home. He knew her rhythms from the calendar on her desk. New York on Tuesdays, Tokyo calls at midnight, investor dinners that ran until the morning editions hit the stands. Then one morning she came in early. Marcus was cleaning the hallway outside her office when the elevator chimed. Victoria stepped out, phone pressed to her ear, heels announcing her presence like artillery fire. Her voice carried that particular edge of someone who'd learned that volume was weakness, but precision was power. I don't care what the lawyers say. Settle it. I want this done by Friday. She walked past him without looking, and Marcus moved his cart aside to let her through. As she passed, he caught a scent that triggered something in the back of his brain. Chanel number 22, specific and deliberate, the same perfume that had lingered in post-op rooms 14 years ago when he'd still believed in clean endings. 5 minutes later, something fell inside her office. Marcus knocked twice on the doorframe, keeping his eyes down, keeping everything down. Ma'am, do you need... Come in. He pushed the door open slowly. A folder lay on the floor, papers scattered across Persian carpet that probably cost more than his car had before he sold it. Medical documents. He recognized the format before he consciously registered the words. Lab results. Hospital letterhead. St. Augustine. Marcus bent down and gathered the pages without reading them. Habits from another life asserting themselves without permission. He stacked them carefully. Edges aligned with the precision of someone who'd once filed surgical reports while covered in blood and set them on her desk exactly where she could reach them. Victoria watched him from behind her computer, dark eyes tracking every movement with an intensity that made the air feel thinner. You didn't look at them. No, ma'am. Most people would have. Marcus met her gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Long enough to be respectful, short enough to avoid challenge. I'm not most people. Something shifted in her expression, like clouds moving across a landscape she'd thought she knew. She stood, walked around her desk, stopped 3 feet away with her arms crossed. The posture of someone used to physical space being a weapon. You were here last Tuesday, in the lobby. Yes, ma'am, your shirt was wet from the coffee. I saw something underneath. Marcus's jaw tightened. Every instinct screamed at him to leave, to retreat, to protect what little privacy he had left. But leaving meant questions, and questions meant answers he couldn't afford to give. What is it? A tattoo? It's personal. I'm asking, and I'm not answering. The silence stretched between them like a high wire with no net. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Not anger exactly, but something closer to disbelief. Nobody spoke to her like that. Not employees, not partners, not anyone who understood how the world actually worked. I could have you reassigned, then do it. The words came out before Marcus could calculate their cost. He watched her face shift through several expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, anger, something that might have been respect if he squinted and tilted his head just right. Get back to work. Marcus picked up his card and turned toward the door, every step measured, every breath controlled. At the threshold, he paused, not quite looking back, but not quite leaving either. Ma'am, those medical files, the ones from St. Augustine, you should keep them somewhere more secure. How did you? You learn things when you are invisible. People forget you're in the room. He left before she could respond, pulling the door shut with a soft click that felt like punctuation on a conversation that shouldn't have happened. That afternoon, Sophie appeared with a clipboard and an apologetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. Miss Ashford requested a background check on all new personnel assigned to executive floors. Everything before 2019. Marcus kept his face neutral, kept his voice steady, kept every part of himself locked down tight. There's nothing before 2019. Sophie's pen hovered over her form. Everyone has something. Previous employment, education, tax records. Not me. She wrote something down, probably a note about how he was being difficult, how he wasn't cooperating, how he was exactly the kind of employee who caused problems. Marcus had learned to recognize that particular brand of bureaucratic disappointment. After she left, he stood in the hallway for 30 seconds with his hands clenched so tight his knuckles went white. The security camera in the corner watched him with its unblinking eye. Marcus wondered if anyone was monitoring the feed, if anyone cared enough to notice the man in the janitor's uniform trying not to fall apart. He got back to work. That night, Victoria sat alone in her office with a file folder that should have been thicker. 2 pages. That's all the system had on Marcus Kane. Address in East Boston, age 38, widowed, 1 dependent, current employment with date started, previous employment, blank, education, blank, professional licenses, blank, tax records before 2019, not found. She picked up her phone and dialed Vincent Cross, the private investigator she kept on retainer for situations that required discretion and a flexible relationship with conventional ethics. I need you to find someone. Vincent's voice crackled through the speaker with the resigned patience of a man who'd heard every variation of this request. Usual rate? Double. I need it in 4 days. Must be important. Victoria looked at the folder again, at the white space where a life should have been. He's a ghost. Nobody disappears that completely without a reason. You want to know the reason. I want to know everything. 4 days later, the envelope arrived by courier at 11 p.m., delivered to her office when the building was empty, except for security guards and people like Victoria who'd forgotten how to leave. 3 pages and 2 photographs. Marcus Kane reduced to facts and surveillance shots. Page 1 confirmed what she already knew. Current employment, no criminal record, bankruptcy filing in 2018 with medical debt that made Victoria's throat tighten. $180,000 in hospital bills, all discharged. Wife deceased, Rebecca Marie Kane, October 18, 2018. Cause of death, ovarian cancer, stage 4. Page 2 showed surveillance photos. Marcus outside Riverside Elementary holding hands with a boy who had his mother's eyes and his father's careful way of carrying himself. Marcus reaching up to change a light bulb, shirt stretched tight across his chest, revealing the unmistakable outline of wings, large, deliberate, spanning from shoulder to shoulder like something out of a religious painting or a medical textbook. Page 3 contained Vincent's notes in his characteristically sparse prose. Subject lives simply, no social life observed, walks or takes public transit, attends son's school functions, no obvious vices. Tattoo appears to be angel wings with text, possibly Latin, significance unknown. Victoria stared at the photographs until the images burned themselves into her memory. She'd seen markings like that before, on doctors, on surgeons specifically. the ones who carried their failures like crosses and their victories like insufficient penance. She opened her laptop and typed with hands that wanted to shake. Large wing tattoo medical meaning. The search results came back immediately. Caduceus, Monovasclepius, angel wings with Latin phrases, and one forum post on a medical community board that made her breathing shallow. Got mine after my license was revoked. The wings remind me who I used to be, who I can never be again. Victoria's heart hammered against her ribs. She searched again. St. Augustine Medical Malpractice 2011. Dozens of results, lawsuits, settlements, policy changes. And one article dated September 2011 that made the world tilt sideways. Surgeon accused of negligence in emergency heart surgery, family files lawsuit. The article was brief, sanitized, scrubbed of details that might identify the patients or the doctor. A 20-year-old college student, emergency mitral valve repair, complications, or rather, the family's claim of complications, permanent disfigurement, the lawsuit alleged. The hospital had settled quietly. The surgeon's name was redacted from public records, but the case number was there, 2011 CV 08847. Victoria's father had been on St. Augustine's board of directors for 20 years before his death. She still had archive access. Nobody had bothered to revoke her credentials when he'd passed. She logged in with fingers that felt disconnected from her body and entered the case number. The file opened. Plaintiff, Ashford family, represented by Senator Richard Ashford. Patient, Victoria Marie Ashford, age 20, date of birth, March 15, 1991. Surgeon, Dr. Marcus James Kane, MD. The words swam in front of her eyes. Victoria stood so fast her chair crashed backward into the wall. Her hands pressed against the desk, trying to ground herself in something solid while her entire understanding of the last 14 years dissolved like sugar in rain. She scrolled down, reading details that should have been familiar, but felt like discovering someone else's memories. Emergency surgery, mitral valve repair, minimally invasive approach. Patient survival rate without intervention, less than 5%. Post-operative scarring within normal range for emergency procedure. And then, complaint filed by Senator Richard Ashford, alleging disfigurement affecting patients' future prospects. Hospital action, Dr. Kane's surgical privileges revoked October 2011. Medical license permanently revoked April 2012 after sustained pressure from complainant's legal team. Victoria's stomach turned over. She made it to the private bathroom in her office before she vomited, heaving up expensive coffee and the protein bar that had been her only food that day. She knelt on imported tile and remembered being 20 years old, waking up in a hospital bed with machines beeping, and a young doctor standing beside her with kind eyes and steady hands. You're going to be fine. The surgery was successful, but the scars prove you survived. Be proud of it. She'd forgotten his face over the years, forgotten everything except her father's anger and the lawsuit and the vague understanding that someone had hurt her and needed to pay. She'd signed the papers when she turned 22, trusting her father, trusting the lawyers, trusting everyone except the man who'd saved her life. Victoria pulled herself up, using the sink, rinsed her mouth, and looked at her reflection. With shaking hands, she unbuttoned the top of her blouse. The scar ran from the base of her throat to the center of her chest, 8 inches of pale, slightly raised tissue that she'd spent 14 years hiding. She'd built an empire, crushed competitors, dominated boardrooms, all while wearing turtlenecks and scarves in the armor of someone who believed she'd been damaged. And the man who'd given her this scar, who'd cut her open and saved her life and lost everything because of it, that man was on his knees in her lobby, cleaning up coffee she'd spilled without a second thought. Victoria buttoned her blouse with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. She grabbed her coat and keys and walked out of her office without turning off the lights or locking the door or doing any of the careful rituals that usually governed her exits. She drove to East Boston in her BMW, parking across the street from a building that should have been condemned years ago. Through a third-floor window, she could see them. Marcus reading to Ethan on a sagging couch, the boy's head resting on his father's shoulder. Both of them bathed in the yellow light of cheap bulbs that probably cost less than her morning coffee. Marcus was smiling, actually smiling, in a way she'd never seen during working hours. The expression transformed his face, made him look younger, made him look like someone who still remembered how to hope. Then he stood, lifting his son with careful arms, carrying him toward what must have been a bedroom. Ethan's head lolled against his father's shoulder, trusting, safe, loved. Victoria gripped the steering wheel hard enough to leave marks on her palms. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sophie about tomorrow's board meeting, but she didn't respond. She sat in the dark for 2 hours, watching the lights go out in Marcus Kane's apartment, one by one, watching the man her family destroyed tuck his son into bed and stand at the window, looking out at a city that had taken everything from him. When she finally drove home, her vision blurred with tears she hadn't cried in years. The email came Tuesday morning, subject line in all caps. Mandatory all-staff meeting. Wednesday, 10 a.m. Gordon Hayes' name sat at the top like a threat. The body text mentioned efficiency improvements and personnel adjustments, corporate speak for someone's getting fired. Marcus read it on his phone during his lunch break, 15 minutes on a bench outside the building, eating a sandwich Ethan had helped make the night before. His stomach knotted. Personnel adjustments. He'd been assigned to the executive floor for 3 weeks, had already drawn attention, had already refused to explain himself to Victoria Ashford. The math wasn't complicated. That evening, Ethan noticed something was wrong. "Dad, you okay? You look worried." Marcus forced a smile that felt like lifting weights. "I'm fine, buddy. Just tired." But his hands shook when he poured his coffee the next morning, and Ethan saw that too. The boy was too observant for his own good, too aware that their life balanced on the edge of a blade, and one wrong move could send them tumbling. Wednesday morning, Marcus arrived at 6:30 to set up chairs in the main atrium. 200 seats arranged in precise rows. He counted under his breath, using the rhythm to keep his hands steady and his mind focused on something other than the expanding sense of doom. The atrium filled quickly, executives in Tom Ford and Brioni, managers clutching tablets like security blankets, administrative staff clustering near the coffee station and speaking in nervous whispers. Marcus positioned himself against the back wall, trying to disappear into the architecture. Victoria entered last, her face the color of old paper, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she'd slept as little as he had. She walked to the front without looking at anyone, sitting in the first row with her spine rigid and her hands clasped in her lap. Gordon Hayes took the stage at 10 sharp, red-faced, silver-haired, wearing confidence like cologne. He opened with quarterly numbers, growth projections, the usual corporate theater designed to soften whatever blow was coming. Then he clicked to a new slide. Areas of improvement. One of those areas, ladies and gentlemen, is custodial services, specifically response times, incomplete tasks, and general negligence on the executive floors. Marcus's grip tightened on the mop handle he'd been holding. His heart rate kicked up, flooding his system with adrenaline he couldn't use. Gordon pointed toward the back of the room. "Marcus Kane, step forward." The silence was absolute. 200 people holding their breath, waiting for the spectacle. Marcus didn't move. Every instinct told him to stay invisible, to somehow make this not be happening through sheer force of will. Kane. Now. He set down the mop and walked down the center aisle. Each step echoed in the cavernous space. Eyes tracked him from every direction. Curious, embarrassed, hungry for drama. Victoria sat motionless in the front row, staring at her hands. Marcus stopped 10 feet from the stage. Gordon looked down at him like a judge considering sentence. "You've been assigned to floor 14 for 3 weeks. In that time, you've been late twice, left a conference room unlocked, and yesterday you failed to restock supplies in Miss Ashford's office. Do you have an explanation?" Marcus kept his voice level. "I made mistakes. I'll fix them." Gordon laughed, not with humor, but with the particular cruelty of someone who enjoyed watching others squirm. "Fix them? You're a liability. Frankly, I don't know why we hired you in the first place." A few people shifted in their seats. Someone coughed. Most just stared. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." Marcus raised his eyes, met Gordon's gaze, and held it. "Are you even qualified for this job? What's your work history?" "It's not relevant." Gordon stepped closer to the edge of the stage, his face reddening. "I'm making it relevant. Answer the question." "I worked in healthcare." "Doing what? Mopping floors there too?" Laughter rippled through part of the crowd, nervous, relieved it wasn't them up there, grateful for the entertainment. Marcus stood perfectly still, channeling 14 years of humiliation into silence. You're slow, you're sloppy, and you're wasting company resources. This company has standards, Kane. Clearly you don't meet them. The door at the back of the room slammed open. Ethan burst through, his face red and streaked with tears, his teacher rushing behind him trying to apologize. But the boy didn't stop. He ran down the center aisle, past 200 adults frozen in their seats, and threw himself at his father. Dad, they called from school and you didn't answer, and I thought something happened to you. Marcus dropped to his knees instantly, arms wrapping around his son. Hey, buddy, what's wrong? I'm fine, I'm right here. Ethan's voice broke into sobs. But you didn't answer your phone and they said there was an emergency and I thought, no emergency. My phone was in my locker. I'm sorry, Ethan. I'm okay. Gordon's voice cut through the moment like a blade. Who authorized a child to enter this building? Miss Chen, Ethan's teacher, stood at the back, wringing her hands. I'm so sorry. There was a miscommunication at the school. Security, remove the child. Ethan's grip tightened around his father's waist. Don't let them hurt you, Dad. Marcus placed his hands on his son's shoulders, keeping his voice steady even as his heart shattered. Nobody's hurting me. I'm okay. But they were being mean to you. It's okay, buddy, I promise. Victoria stood from her seat in the front row. The movement was slow, deliberate, every eye in the room tracking her rise. Her face had gone from pale to bloodless, her hands trembling at her sides. Her voice, when it came, cut through the case like winter wind. Bringing a child here during work hours? The room went silent. Victoria's eyes found Marcus, held his gaze for one endless second. Get the hell out of here. Both of you. Marcus couldn't move, couldn't process what was happening. Ethan was crying. Everyone was staring. Victoria's voice rose, sharp and final. You're fired, effective immediately. Ethan sobbed harder. Marcus lifted his son, holding him close, and turned toward the exit. He walked past 200 people in complete silence, past managers and executives and administrative staff who would forget his name by tomorrow. As he passed Victoria, their eyes met for half a second. Hers were wet. The atrium doors closed behind them with a sound like a coffin lid. Inside, whispers started spreading like wildfire. Did you see his shirt when he bent down? Yeah, it looked like wings. Wait, isn't that what doctors get? Victoria stood on the stage, alone, her hand pressed to her chest where a scar burned beneath expensive fabric. Gordon started to speak, but she cut him off with a gesture. Meeting adjourned. She walked toward the exit on legs that barely held her, past faces that blurred into a sea of judgment and confusion. In her office, she locked the door and slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor. The scar on her chest ached like it hadn't in years. Marcus Kane had saved her life, and she just destroyed what little remained of his. 2 hours after the firing, Marcus stood in the basement locker room emptying his metal compartment into a cardboard box salvaged from the recycling bin. His spare work shirt, folded with hospital corners from habits that predated this job by a decade. Steel-toed boots with worn soles. A thermos Rebecca had given him their last Christmas together, dented on one side from when he'd dropped it running to catch the bus. And taped inside the locker door, protected by clear packing tape yellowed at the edges. A photograph of her in her teacher's classroom, surrounded by construction paper cutouts and that smile that used to make him believe in second chances. He peeled the tape slowly, carefully, preserving what couldn't be replaced. The adhesive left residue on the metal. Someone else would get this locker tomorrow, next week, eventually. They'd scrub away the marks and never know what had been there. The fire alarm split the air before he could close the box. Strobes flashed red along the ceiling, and the recorded voice commanded immediate evacuation in that calm, automated tone designed not to cause panic, but always achieving the opposite. Employees poured into the stairwells, a controlled chaos of expensive shoes on concrete steps, and worried voices asking if this was a drill. Marcus grabbed his jacket and joined the flow toward the exits. The smell hit him halfway to the door. Smoke. Real smoke. Not the acrid electrical burn of a malfunction, but the organic char of something actually on fire. The crowd moved faster. Someone's phone rang, shrill and insistent. Ignored. Then he heard it. Faint, almost swallowed by the alarm and the footsteps in the building's mechanical groan, but unmistakable once his ears locked onto the frequency. Help! Someone please! Marcus stopped. The crowd flowed around him like water around a stone. Everyone focused on the green exit signs and their own survival. He turned against the current, pushing back toward the stairwell access door. Inside, smoke filled the upper landings in gray-black clouds that made his eyes water immediately. Marcus pulled his shirt over his nose and mouth and took the stairs up instead of down, following the voice through air that tasted like burning plastic and fear. On the landing between the 12th and 13th floors, 4 people huddled against the wall. 3 men in suits, faces streaked with soot, coughing, and Victoria Ashford, sitting on the concrete with her back against the painted cinder block, gasping like a drowning woman breaking the surface. Her empty inhaler lay beside her, the small blue plastic container that usually lived in her desk drawer, now useless on the floor. Her chest heaved in rapid, shallow movements that Marcus recognized instantly. The mechanical failure of airways constricting, smooth muscle spasming, oxygen exchange breaking down at the cellular level. He took the stairs 2 at a time. The men looked at him with desperate relief, like he was cavalry instead of the janitor they'd probably never noticed before today. The elevator stopped. She started having trouble breathing. Marcus knelt in front of Victoria, his hands finding her shoulders, grounding her in something physical, while her autonomic nervous system misfired. His voice shifted into the register he'd used 1,000 times before, calm and authoritative, and completely certain. Even when certainty was a fiction, they both needed to believe. Asthma? Victoria nodded, unable to waste breath on words. Where's your backup inhaler? She shook her head. No backup, no plan B, nothing but this empty tube of albuterol and the smoke thickening with every second they stayed put. Marcus turned to the 3 men, his tone allowing no argument. Get out now. To the stairs. Stay low. Move. They hesitated. Corporate loyalty or confusion or shock keeping them frozen. Now I have her. They went. Marcus placed one hand on Victoria's chest, feeling the rapid flutter of her heart through fabric and bone, and the other on her upper back, creating a physical framework her panicked system could reference. His face filled her field of vision, blocking out the smoke and the strobing emergency lights in everything except his eyes. Look at me. Count to 4. Breathe in through your nose. Victoria tried, failed, her body fighting against commands her brain couldn't enforce. Yes, you can. With me. 1, 2, 3, 4. Her eyes locked onto his, desperate, terrified in a way he suspected she rarely allowed herself to be. Hold it. 2, 3, 4. Out through your mouth. 2, 3, 4. They repeated the pattern 3 times, 4, 5. The psychological override working where medicine couldn't, her breathing slowing fractionally, her shoulders dropping a 1/4 inch, enough to keep her conscious and functional. We have to move. Can you stand? Victoria nodded weakly. Marcus pulled her arm over his shoulder and lifted, taking most of her weight as they started down. Floor by floor, step by deliberate step, her body pressed against his side and his arm locked around her waist. The smoke thinned as they descended. By the 9th floor, she was breathing easier. By the 7th, she was supporting more of her own weight. At ground level, firefighters in full gear met them at the stairwell exit. One took Victoria, guiding her toward the ambulance staging area. Another grabbed Marcus's arm. You okay? I'm fine. The firefighter studied him with professional assessment, checking for shock, for burns, for the 100 ways emergencies broke people. You a paramedic or something? No, you sure acted like one. Good instincts. Marcus didn't respond. He walked toward the edge of the parking lot, away from the crowd and the emergency vehicles and Victoria Ashford being loaded into an ambulance with an oxygen mask obscuring half her face. His phone showed 3:17. Ethan got out of school at 3:30. He needed to figure out childcare for tomorrow, start making calls about job openings, calculate how long their savings would last if he couldn't find work by the end of the month. No job, no income, so rent due in 11 days. The math was simple and brutal and entirely familiar. Inside the ambulance, Victoria pulled the oxygen mask away from her face. The paramedic checking her vitals looked young enough to be fresh out of school, earnest and competent, and exactly the kind of person who joined this profession still believing they could save everyone. Your O2 sat is coming back up. You're lucky. Another couple minutes in that smoke. The paramedic didn't finish. Some sentences ended themselves. The man who pulled me out. Who is he? The paramedic glanced toward the parking lot, following Victoria's gaze to where Marcus was walking away, hands in his pockets, shoulders hunched against the October wind. No idea, but he knew exactly what he was doing. Victoria tried to call after him, tried to form his name around the rawness in her throat, but he was already gone, disappearing into the city like he'd never been there at all. By 6 that evening, Marcus had returned to the building to collect the cardboard box from his locker. The fire department had cleared the structure, declared it safe with minor smoke damage contained to the upper mechanical floors. Electrical malfunction, they said. Could have been worse. He was loading the box into the trunk of his Honda Civic, bought used in 2019 with cash from selling Rebecca's car, now with 170,000 miles and a check engine light that came and went like a capricious ghost, when he heard footsteps behind him. Marcus. He didn't turn around, just kept arranging items in the trunk with more care than they required. There's nothing to talk about. Yes, there is. Victoria's voice carried the hoarseness of smoke inhalation and something else underneath, something that might have been pleading if she'd known how to plead. Marcus closed the trunk and faced her, and for the first time since the fire, she saw him clearly in natural light. The gray in his hair that hadn't been there in the photos from 14 years ago. The lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and hard-won survival. The way he held himself like a man who'd learned to take up as little space as possible. You fired me in front of 200 people. While my son was crying. We're done talking. Victoria stepped closer, her hair still damp from the shower at the emergency room, wearing borrowed scrubs because her clothes had reeked of smoke. Her hands shook at her sides. I know who you are. Marcus went absolutely still. The parking garage's fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting shadows that made the concrete pillars look like prison bars. I know you were a surgeon. I know what happened at St. Augustine. I know my father. Stop! The word cracked through the space between them. Victoria flinched but didn't retreat. I know he destroyed your career. I was the patient. I was 8 years old. 20. You were 20, junior at Harvard. September 15th, 2011. Marcus's voice was flat, reciting facts like a medical chart. Victoria's breath caught, her hand instinctively moving to her chest where the scar lived. I didn't know it was you. Not until yesterday. I found the files. I saw the lawsuit. My father, your father did what rich men do when reality doesn't match their expectations. He found someone to punish. I was 20. I didn't understand. I trusted him. Marcus turned back to his car, his hand on the door handle. But you signed the lawsuit when you turned 22. The renewal when I tried to challenge the suspension. You signed your name right next to his. Victoria's face went white. How did you? Because I remember every document, every filing, every letter from every lawyer who explained why my medical degree didn't matter as much as your father's political connections. I remember your signature, especially your signature. He opened the car door. Victoria grabbed his arm, and he froze at the contact, his whole body going rigid. Wait, please, for what? So you can apologize? So you can feel better about yourself? I want to fix this. Marcus spun to face her, and something in him cracked open, all the carefully maintained control shattering against the weight of 14 years. His voice echoed off the concrete walls, raw and terrible. You can't fix this. You can't fix 14 years of my life. You can't bring back my wife. You can't undo the fact that she died thinking I was a failure. Victoria stepped back, tears streaming down her face, her hands still outstretched between them. I didn't know about your wife. I didn't know. You didn't want to know. You wanted someone to blame for not being perfect. And I was convenient. That's not... Marcus's voice cracked, all the rage draining into something worse. My wife had cancer, stage 4 ovarian, diagnosed in 2015. I quit everything to take care of her. We sold our house, liquidated our retirement, borrowed against insurance policies that weren't designed to cover terminal illness. And while I was watching her die one cell at a time, your lawyers were taking everything else I had left. Victoria covered her mouth with both hands, a sound escaping that might have been a sob or a prayer or both. She asked me once why I didn't fight back, why I didn't defend myself, hire lawyers, contest the board's decision. You know what I told her? Victoria shook her head, unable to speak. I told her it didn't matter. That as long as we had each other, I didn't need a medical license or a title or any of the things that used to define me. I told her we'd be okay. Marcus wiped his eyes roughly, the gesture more anger than grief. She died believing I hurt people, that I failed, that I wasn't good enough. Because your family made sure the story everyone knew was about my mistakes, not about the 20-year-old girl whose heart I restarted when it stopped on the table. Not about the fact that you're on right now because I spent 8 hours reconstructing your mitral valve with hands steady enough to thread a needle through tissue the width of paper. Let me help you get your license back. Let me make this right. I don't want your guilt money. I don't want your charity. I don't want anything from you. Then what do you want? The question hung between them like a challenge. Marcus looked at her, really looked, seeing past the CEO armor to the woman who'd signed papers she hadn't read and built an empire to prove she was worth saving. I want you to leave me alone. Victoria's legs gave out. She sank to her knees on the oil-stained concrete, her expensive borrowed scrubs soaking up decades of automotive fluids and urban grime. Her voice came out broken. Then let me earn it. Let me earn your forgiveness. Marcus stared down at her, this woman who'd fired him this morning and whose life he'd saved this afternoon, whose father had destroyed him and whose signature had buried him, who was now on her knees in a parking garage begging for something he didn't know how to give. Stand up. You're embarrassing yourself. I won't stand until you let me try. Marcus got into his car, started the engine, and backed out of the space without looking at her. He didn't look as he drove past her kneeling figure. He didn't look when he pulled onto the street and merged into Boston traffic. His hands gripped the steering wheel hard enough to hurt, and his vision blurred with tears he wouldn't let fall until he was alone. Behind him, Victoria stayed on her knees for 20 minutes while security cameras recorded every second. Eventually she stood, her legs stiff and aching, and walked to her BMW on autopilot. Inside, she sat without starting the engine while her phone buzzed with urgent messages. The board wanted an emergency meeting. Investors were concerned about the fire. Her assistant needed decisions on 17 different issues. Victoria typed a single reply to her assistant. Tell the board I'll be there tomorrow morning. Then she drove home in silence. 3 days later, Marcus was at the grocery store with Ethan when his phone started buzzing. Text messages from numbers he didn't recognize. Voicemails from people identifying themselves as journalists. By the time they got home, 2 news vans were parked outside their building, cameramen and reporters doing that particular lean that said they were ready to wait however long it took. Marcus took Ethan through the back entrance, up the service stairs that smelled like mildew and old cooking, into their apartment where he locked the door and turned on the television. Every channel ran variations of the same story. Billionaire CEO kneels in parking garage, apology or publicity stunt. The security footage had leaked, showing Victoria on her knees and Marcus driving away, the timestamp proving she'd stayed there long after he'd gone. Pundits debated her sincerity. Social media exploded with takes ranging from sympathetic to cynical to viciously entertaining. Marcus turned off the TV. Ethan looked up at him with those blue eyes that were too old for 11. Dad, are we in trouble? No, buddy, they'll get bored and leave soon. But they didn't leave. By morning, there were twice as many vans, and reporters were knocking on neighbors' doors, offering money for information about Marcus Kane and his son. Marcus stopped answering his phone. He spent the day applying for jobs online, custodial positions, warehouse work, anything that might hire someone whose employment history had a suspicious 6-year gap and whose face was now plastered across local news. Every application asked the same question. Have you ever been involved in a lawsuit? Marcus clicked yes. Nobody called back. On Thursday, Ethan came home with a black eye, his school uniform shirt torn at the shoulder, his backpack dragging behind him like an anchor. Marcus was on his knees before his son made it through the door. What happened? Tyler said you're a liar, that you hurt people and got fired for being bad at your job. Marcus pulled his son close, feeling the tremors running through the small body, the way Ethan was trying so hard not to cry. What did you do? I pushed him. He fell down. Principal Wallace called you, but you didn't answer, so they called emergency contact and Ethan's voice broke into sobs. Marcus held him tighter, his own anger at Tyler, at Tyler's parents, at every person who'd ever made his son feel small, burning hot enough to hurt. You can't fight other kids. I know fighting doesn't fix things, but he was lying about you, I know. But sometimes people don't want the truth. They want the story that makes them feel better about their own choices. Ethan pulled back, wiping his nose on his sleeve. Do you miss being a doctor? Marcus looked at his son's face, Rebecca's eyes, his own stubborn chin, a combination of their best and worst qualities wrapped in a body that deserved better than this. Every single day. Then why don't you go back? The question was so simple, so impossibly naive, that Marcus didn't have an answer that wouldn't sound like giving up. Instead, he held his son and let the silence be its own kind of honesty. That night, an email arrived. Subject line, medical review report, case number 2011, CV08847. Marcus stared at it for a full minute before opening, half convinced it was spam or a phishing attempt or some new species of cruelty the universe had invented specifically for him. Inside was a 20-page document reviewing his malpractice case in excruciating detail. Medical testimony from 3 independent cardiovascular surgeons, analysis of his surgical technique, post-operative care, patient outcomes, comparison to standard of care in emergency mitral valve repair. The conclusion was set in bold text, no evidence of negligence or malpractice. Dr. Marcus Kane's actions were consistent with accepted medical standards and likely saved the patient's life. Allegations appear motivated by external pressures rather than medical fact. At the bottom, reports submitted to Massachusetts State Medical Board. Hearing scheduled for December 12, 2025. You are required to appear. No signature, no name. But Marcus knew who'd sent it, who'd paid for independent experts to review 14-year-old surgical records, who'd weaponized money in his favor the same way her father had weaponized it against him. Outside his apartment, a car had been parked across the street for 2 hours. Victoria sat behind the wheel watching the third-floor window where Marcus had just read the email she'd commissioned. She'd spent $90,000 on the medical review, another $40,000 on attorneys to navigate the board's procedures, and an amount she refused to calculate on the private investigators who tracked down witnesses and hospital staff willing to testify. Her phone showed a new message from her lawyer. The board voted. They want you to resign. If you fight this, it'll destroy your reputation, your father's legacy, everything you've built. Victoria typed back, let them want. Then she deleted the message thread and put her phone on silent. Monday morning brought a news story. A journalist from the Boston Globe had done actual research instead of recycling press releases, and the piece ran above the fold with a headline that made Marcus's stomach turn. The doctor who lost everything and the billionaire who took it. The article detailed his career at St. Augustine, youngest chief resident in the program's history, published research on minimally invasive pediatric cardiac procedures, patient outcomes that exceeded national averages by statistically significant margins. It detailed Victoria's emergency surgery, her father's subsequent lawsuit, the hospital's decision to revoke privileges rather than fight a senator with committee assignments that controlled their funding. It detailed Rebecca's diagnosis 3 years later, Marcus's decision to quit a visiting position at Mass General to become her full-time caregiver, the medical bills that consumed their savings in their home and every asset they'd accumulated. It detailed her death, his bankruptcy, the 6 months he'd spent homeless before a social worker connected him with subsidized housing and a custodial job. By noon, the story had been shared 40,000 times. By evening, it was trending on 3 different social media platforms. Marcus didn't read it. He heard about it from Principal Wallace, who called to inform him that several parents had requested Ethan be moved to a different classroom. For the safety of their children, they'd said, as if poverty were contagious. Marcus picked Ethan up early, finding reporters camped at the school's back exit with cameras and microphones and that predatory energy that came from knowing they had a story people would click on. Mr. Kane, do you blame Victoria Ashford for your wife's death? Are you planning to sue for wrongful termination? Someone grabbed his arm. Marcus pulled free, shielding Ethan with his body, pushing through the crowd toward his car. Inside, Ethan was crying again. Why won't they leave us alone? Because people like stories more than truth. Stories are simple. Truth is complicated. That night, someone knocked at 8:15. Marcus checked the peephole expecting another reporter, but found instead a woman in her 60s wearing a state ID badge and carrying a leather folder. Dr. Kane, I'm with the Massachusetts State Medical Board. Marcus opened the door slowly, aware of Ethan hovering behind him, listening. The woman handed him the folder. Inside was a letter on official letterhead, dense with legal language that reduced 14 years of his life to whereas clauses and procedural requirements. The relevant sentence was highlighted. A hearing has been scheduled for December 12, 2025, to review the suspension and potential reinstatement of your medical license. Your attendance is mandatory. Is this real? Yes, sir. Marcus's hand shook, holding the paper. Who submitted the evidence? I'm not at liberty to say, but it was comprehensive. Someone spent considerable resources building your case. After she left, Marcus sat with the letter while Ethan climbed onto the couch beside him. What does it say? It says I might get to be a doctor again. Really? Maybe. Ethan leaned against his father's shoulder, and Marcus wrapped an arm around him. And they sat like that while the city moved on outside their window, cars honking, sirens wailing. The eternal motion of a place that had no time for individual tragedies or unlikely redemptions. Across town, Victoria sat in her attorney's office listening to a man who'd graduated from Yale Law explain in excruciating detail why fighting the board's request for her resignation was professional suicide. The optics were terrible. The board had cause. Her father's reputation would be tarnished. Better to step down gracefully, take a consulting position, let the storm pass. I'm not resigning. The attorney leaned back in his chair, the kind that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Victoria, be reasonable. If you force their hand, I'm not forcing anything. I'm stepping down. On my terms. There's a difference. What difference? One is about protecting myself. The other is about doing what I should have done 14 years ago. The attorney tried to argue, but Victoria was already standing, already leaving, already done with rooms full of men telling her what she couldn't do. Outside, someone had keyed her car in the executive parking garage. The message was carved deep into the BMW's passenger door. You destroyed him. Victoria traced the letters with her finger, then got in and drove to East Boston. She parked across from Marcus's building and sat there for an hour, watching lights turn on and off in apartments where families were having dinner, arguing over homework, living the ordinary lives she'd traded for empire and control and the kind of loneliness that money couldn't solve. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Leave him alone. He doesn't want your apology. Victoria stared at the message for a long time before typing back. I know, but she didn't leave. The press conference was scheduled for 2 p.m. Thursday at the Ashford Industries main headquarters. Victoria stood backstage, listening to the crowd gather. 300 seats filling rapidly, cameras lining the back wall, her publicist touching her arm and asking one last time if she was sure about this. You don't have to do this. We can spin it differently. Control the narrative. No more spin, no more narrative. Just truth. Victoria walked onto the stage. Camera flashes erupted like small explosions. She stood at the podium, hands gripping the edges, and spoke into the microphone with a voice that carried through the room and through the speakers and through every television and computer screen tuned to the live feed. My name is Victoria Ashford. 14 years ago, Dr. Marcus Kane saved my life. She unbuttoned the top of her blouse, not suggestively, not dramatically, just matter-of-factly, revealing the scar that ran from the base of her throat to the center of her chest. Cameras zoomed in, gasps rippled through the audience. This is what my father called disfigurement. This is what he used to destroy a man's career. But this scar is proof I survived when I had less than a 5% chance. This scar exists because Dr. Kane spent 8 hours reconstructing my heart valve with hands steady enough to thread sutures through tissue thinner than paper. She pulled medical records from a folder on the podium. These surgical reports confirmed Dr. Kane performed the procedure flawlessly. There was no malpractice, no negligence, no error, just a scar and a father who couldn't accept that his daughter wasn't perfect. Victoria set the papers down carefully. My father was on St. Augustine's board of directors. He filed a lawsuit claiming negligence. He pressured the hospital. He made sure Dr. Kane's license was revoked. And I was 22 years old when I signed the renewal. Trusting my father, trusting our lawyers, never asking if the story I'd been told was true. A reporter raised her hand, but Victoria continued without pause. While my father was destroying Dr. Kane's career, Dr. Kane was watching his wife die. Rebecca Kane was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer in 2015. Dr. Kane quit medicine to become her full-time caregiver. They sold their home to pay for treatments. When she passed in 2018, he had nothing left. Not savings, not a career, not even his dignity. Victoria's voice stayed steady through force of will. I hired him. I humiliated him. I fired him. And I didn't know who he was until it was too late. I'm not here asking for forgiveness. I'm here to tell the truth. Dr. Marcus Kane saved over 300 children during his career. He saved me, and we repaid him by taking everything. She held up a check, turning it to face the cameras. This is $15 million for the National Medical Justice Fund, to support doctors wrongfully accused, to prevent this from happening to anyone else. I've also submitted evidence to the state medical board to review Dr. Kane's case. If they reinstate his license, I will fund a clinic in his name, free pediatric care for children who need it most. Victoria folded her hands on the podium. Dr. Kane doesn't know I'm doing this. He didn't ask. He doesn't want anything from me. But I'm doing it anyway because it's right, because I owe him a debt I can never repay, because some mistakes don't have expiration dates and some wrongs demand correction regardless of the cost. She stepped away from the podium and walked off stage without taking questions, without acknowledging the eruption of voice and camera flashes behind her. In the green room, her publicist was simultaneously cheering and panicking. Her assistant was fielding calls from board members and investors, and Victoria felt lighter than she had in 14 years. Her driver took her home. On the way, she checked her phone and found a news alert. Ashford CEO admits guilt, offers $15 million in restitution. The article included a photo of Marcus outside his building, Ethan's hand in his, a reporter shoving a microphone in his face. The caption, Dr. Kane declined to comment. Victoria stared at the image. He looked exhausted. He looked like a man who wanted to be left alone, and she just made that impossible. Marcus found the letter slipped under his door the morning after Victoria's press conference. Expensive stationery, thick and cream-colored, the kind that announced its cost before you read a single word. Her handwriting was precise, controlled. Each letter formed with the discipline of someone who'd learned early that presentation mattered as much as content. Marcus, I know you don't want to see me, I understand, but I need to ask you something face to face. Will you meet me at Riverside Park tomorrow, 6 a.m., the bench by the oak tree? I'll wait. Victoria. He read it 3 times, then set it on the kitchen counter where it sat all day like a small accusation. That evening, Ethan noticed him staring at it while pretending to read the newspaper. Dad, what's that? Just a letter. From the lady? The one who fired you? Marcus folded the paper carefully, creasing it along lines that had already been creased. Yeah, from her. Ethan was quiet for a moment, pushing his dinner around his plate in patterns that meant he was thinking hard about something. What did Mom used to say about second chances? The question hit Marcus sideways. He set down his fork, looking at his son properly. She said everyone deserves one, even people who hurt us, especially people who hurt us, because forgiving them is harder than holding grudges, and hard things are usually the right things. Then you should go. Marcus went. Riverside Park at 6 a.m. in November was cold enough to make breathing hurt. Marcus arrived 15 minutes late, a petty power play he regretted immediately because Victoria was already there, sitting on the bench in jeans and a plain sweater, no makeup, no armor, looking smaller somehow without the CEO costume. She stood when she saw him, then sat again when he gestured for her to stay put. He took the opposite end of the bench, leaving 3 feet of weathered wood between them. The distance felt both inadequate and vast. For a long time, neither spoke. A church bell rang somewhere in the distance, marking the half hour. Leaves skittered across the path, driven by wind that smelled like winter coming. I didn't think you'd come. Marcus watched a squirrel navigate the oak tree's bare branches with absolute confidence, trusting limbs that looked too thin to hold weight. I almost didn't. Why did you? Because my son asked me if people can change. I told him I didn't know. Victoria's breath misted in the cold air. What do you think now? I think I'm here. That's all I've got. A breeze moved through the trees, carrying the last stubborn leaves toward the ground. Victoria pulled her sweater tighter, a gesture that made her look vulnerable in ways her boardroom presence never allowed. I don't expect you to forgive me. Good, because I don't know if I can, but I need you to know something. That press conference wasn't about me feeling better or protecting my reputation or any kind of damage control. It was about making sure the world knows who you really are, what you gave up, what was taken from you. Marcus finally looked at her directly. I know who I am, but your son doesn't. Not completely. And someday he'll be old enough to search your name online. And I wanted to make sure he finds the truth, not the lies my father spent 14 years building. The words landed soft but heavy. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, some small rotation of perspective that didn't change the past but altered how light hit it. I spent 14 years believing a story, Victoria continued, her voice barely above a whisper. My father told me you made a mistake, that you'd hurt me. I never questioned it because questioning him meant questioning everything else, his love, his judgment, my whole understanding of what happened in that night I almost died. You were 22 when you signed the renewal, old enough to ask questions. I was. You're right. I was a coward. I chose comfort over truth. They sat in silence again. Marcus could feel the cold seeping through his jacket, into his bones, but leaving meant decisions, and decisions meant consequences, and he wasn't ready for either. I'm sorry. The apology hung between them like smoke. Marcus stared at his hands, at the calluses from 6 years of manual labor, at the faint scars on his knuckles from when he'd punched a wall after Rebecca's funeral because hurting something felt better than feeling nothing. Saying sorry doesn't change anything. Victoria's voice cracked just slightly. I know, but it's all I have. The church bell rang 7 times. Marcus stood, joints protesting the cold and the stillness, and the weight of everything that couldn't be fixed with words. The medical board hearing is in 3 weeks, I know. I submitted the evidence. Marcus nodded slowly. If they reinstate my license, if I go back to medicine, you'll practice again. You'll save lives again. I don't know if I remember how. 6 years is a long time. Medicine changes. Protocols change. I might have forgotten. You remembered during the fire. Your hands knew exactly what to do. That was instinct. Muscle memory. Victoria stood to face him, and for the first time since the park bench conversation began, her voice carried the steel he recognized from boardroom negotiations. Exactly. You're still a doctor, Marcus. You've always been a doctor. The license was just permission. The skill never left. She started to walk away, then turned back. If you do get your license back, I meant what I said about the clinic. I'll fund it. No strings, no control. No, just a place where you can do what you were meant to do. Marcus felt words rising in his throat, fighting their way past 14 years of bitterness. Victoria, wait, she stopped, hope and fear warring across her face. If I do this, if I take the license back, if I practice again, I'm not doing it for you, I know. I'm doing it for him, because I want my son to know his father isn't on a failure, that sometimes the world breaks you, but you can still put yourself back together, even if the pieces don't fit the same way they used to. Victoria's eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hide. That's exactly why you should do it. She walked away across the brown grass, her figure growing smaller against the bare trees in the pale morning sky. Marcus stayed on the bench another hour, watching the park wake up around him. Joggers, dog walkers, people moving through their routines with the blessed ignorance of those whose lives hadn't been systematically dismantled by forces beyond their control. His phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. How'd it go? Marcus typed back. still figuring that out. Then he walked home through streets that felt slightly different, though he couldn't have explained how. 2 days later, an envelope arrived by registered mail requiring signature. Marcus signed for it while Ethan was at school, then sat at their small kitchen table, staring at the return address, Men's Warehouse. Inside was a gift card for $500 and a note in Victoria's handwriting. For the hearing, you deserve to look like the doctor you are. Marcus's first instinct was to tear it up, to mail back the pieces with a note explaining that he didn't need her charity, that he could borrow a suit from someone if necessary, that accepting gifts felt too much like forgiveness he wasn't ready to grant. His second instinct was more practical. He didn't know anyone with a suit that would fit him, and showing up to a medical board hearing in his one pair of dress pants from Rebecca's funeral and a shirt with frayed cuffs wouldn't help his case. He used the card that afternoon, letting a salesman with kind eyes and commission breath guide him toward charcoal wool and crisp white cotton and a navy tie that Rebecca would have approved of. In the dressing room mirror, Marcus barely recognized himself. The man looking back had gray in his hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of harder roads than medical residency had prepared him for. But he stood straight, shoulders back, and for a moment looked like someone who deserved to be called doctor again. At the register, the salesman folded everything carefully, wrapping it in tissue paper like something precious. Big interview? Something like that. You'll do great. You've got that look, like you've already survived the worst thing that could happen. Marcus carried the bag home and hung the suit in his closet next to his janitor uniforms. The contrast so stark, it felt like a visual metaphor for every choice he'd made in the last 6 years. That night, Ethan insisted on seeing him try it on again. "Wow, Dad, you look like a real doctor." Marcus adjusted the tie, meeting his son's eyes in the mirror. "I am a real doctor, buddy. The suit doesn't change that. But sometimes the world needs the costume to remember what's underneath." The night before the hearing, Marcus stood in his small bathroom, practicing what he'd say. "My name is Dr. Marcus James Kane. On September 15th, 2011, I performed emergency mitral valve repair on Victoria Ashford. The patient presented with acute mitral regurgitation secondary to congenital valve defect. Without intervention, mortality rate exceeded 95%. I followed all protocols. The surgery was successful. The patient survived." His voice shook on the word survived. He tried again, steadier this time, but the tremor remained. In the mirror, his reflection looked terrified. Ethan appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "You're going to do great, Dad." "How do you know?" "Because Mom told me you're the best doctor in the world. And moms don't lie about important stuff." Marcus pulled his son into a hug, holding on longer than necessary, drawing strength from this small person who believed in him with the absolute certainty that only children possess before the world taught them otherwise. At 9:30, someone knocked. Marcus checked the peephole, expecting another reporter, but found instead an older man in an expensive overcoat, silver hair perfectly styled, shoulders hunched with the weight of age or guilt or both. He opened the door slowly. Senator Ashford stood in the hallway holding his hat in both hands like a penitent at confession. "Dr. Kane, may I come in?" "No." The senator nodded as if he'd expected nothing else. "I deserve that. You deserve considerably more than that. I came to tell you I was wrong about everything, about what I did to you, what I took from you, the lies I told myself to justify it." Marcus kept his hand on the door, ready to close it the moment this conversation became unbearable. Why now? Why not 14 years ago when it might have mattered? Senator Ashford's face aged a decade in the space of a breath. "Because 14 years ago, I was a coward who cared more about my daughter's appearance than your career, more about my political image than your life. I convinced myself I was protecting her, but I was really protecting my own pride. And now my daughter has shown me what real courage looks like. She stood in front of 300 people and told the truth even though it cost her everything. I'm here because she doesn't know I'm coming, and she'd be furious if she did. But I needed to look you in the eye and say I'm sorry." He pulled an envelope from his coat pocket. "This is a letter to the medical board, my full confession, my recommendation for immediate reinstatement. It won't undo the damage, but maybe it'll help tip the scales toward justice." Marcus didn't take the envelope immediately. "You know what your daughter told me? That your lawsuit didn't just destroy my career, it killed my wife. Because while your lawyers were billing hours, I was selling everything we owned to pay for her cancer treatment. Because I couldn't get hospital privileges without a license, couldn't get consulting work without references, couldn't do anything except watch her die, knowing I had skills that could have saved others but couldn't save her. Senator Ashford's eyes glistened. I didn't know about your wife. You didn't ask. That was the problem. You saw a scar on your daughter's chest and decided someone had to pay. And you never once considered that the person you were destroying might be human too. Marcus took the envelope, his hands steady despite the rage and grief and exhaustion swirling in his chest. I'm not doing this for you or for your daughter. I'm doing it for my son, because he deserves a father who isn't buried under someone else's mistakes. That's why you're a better man than me. The senator turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, Durkane, Rebecca would be proud of you. I read about her in the articles. She sounds like she was an extraordinary woman. How dare you speak her name? The words came out quiet, deadly. Senator Ashford flinched, nodded, and walked away down the hallway without looking back. Marcus closed the door and leaned against it, the envelope crumpling slightly in his grip, and tried to remember how to breathe around the fist squeezing his lungs. December 12th dawned cold and clear. Marcus dressed carefully, checking his reflection 3 times before he was satisfied. Ethan insisted on wearing his school uniform despite it being Saturday, said it was important to look professional when supporting his father. They took the bus downtown, Marcus because his car had finally died the week before, Ethan because public transit felt like an adventure when you were 11 and your father was about to get his life back. The Massachusetts State Medical Board hearing room was smaller than Marcus had imagined. 20 chairs, 5 board members behind a long table, fluorescent lights that hummed just slightly off-key. Ethan sat beside him in the front row, small and serious and holding his father's hand with fierce determination. Victoria sat in the back, trying to be invisible. She'd worn black, no jewelry, hair pulled back severely like she was attending a funeral or a trial or both. When Marcus glanced back and their eyes met, she placed her hand over her heart and nodded once. He nodded back. Dr. Patricia Hughes sat 3 rows up, his old mentor from St. Augustine, now 67, and retired but still carrying herself with the authority of someone who'd spent 40 years in operating rooms. She'd flown in from Arizona, where she'd moved to escape Boston winters and memories of talented residents destroyed by hospital politics. When Marcus had called to tell her about the hearing, she'd cried on the phone, then booked a flight before they'd finished talking. The board chairwoman, Dr. Ellen Reeves, 58, with steel gray hair and the steady gaze of someone who'd seen too many capable doctors destroyed by bureaucracy, cleared her throat. This hearing is to review the case of Dr. Marcus James Kane. Medical license suspended October 2011, permanently revoked April 2012. Case number 2011 CB 08847. Dr. Kane, please stand. Marcus stood, and Ethan stood with him, still holding his father's hand. Dr. Reeves smiled slightly at the boy, then returned her attention to her papers. We have reviewed evidence and testimony from 3 independent cardiovascular surgeons, including Dr. Patricia Hughes, who supervised your residency. We've examined surgical records, patient outcomes, and hospital protocols from September 2011. We've also received letters from 17 former colleagues, 43 former patients' families, and 1 United States senator. She removed her reading glasses, a gesture that felt deliberate, theatrical, necessary. The findings are unanimous. The surgery performed on September 15, 2011, was executed flawlessly. Not only did you save the patient's life, but you employed techniques that were innovative for the time and have since become standard practice in minimally invasive cardiac procedures. Marcus felt his knees go weak. Ethan squeezed his hand tighter. Dr. Reeves stood, Dr. Sutton, and the other 4 board members stood with her. There is no evidence of negligence or malpractice. The allegations against you were unfounded and motivated by external pressures unrelated to medical care. Kane, on behalf of this board and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, I apologize. Your medical license is hereby reinstated, effective immediately. The room erupted. Dr. Hughes was crying openly. Victoria covered her mouth with both hands. Ethan let go of his father's hand and threw his arms around his waist, and Marcus dropped to his knees to hold his son properly while tears he'd held back for 6 years finally broke free. A clerk brought forward a document, heavy paper, official seal, his name in elegant script above the words Marcus James Kane, MD, license number MD 87459, reinstated December 12, 2025. He took it with shaking hands, staring at his name, at the title he'd thought was gone forever, at proof that sometimes the world broke you but didn't destroy you, bent you but didn't erase you. You did it, Dad. We did it, buddy. We survived long enough to get here. Hughes pushed through the small crowd, and Marcus stood to embrace his mentor, this woman who taught him to tie surgical knots and read EKGs and never lose faith in his own hands, even when everyone else had. I always knew you were innocent, Marcus. Always. I'm sorry I couldn't do more back then. You did enough. You remembered my name. That was more than most people. Victoria remained in the back row, not approaching, not intruding, just witnessing this moment she'd helped create but didn't deserve to celebrate. Ethan noticed her first, pulling away from his father. Can we say thank you? She helped you, right? Marcus looked across the room at this woman who'd destroyed him and saved him, whose father had buried him and whose money had resurrected him, who represented every complicated truth about human nature that couldn't be reduced to heroes and villains. Yeah, buddy, we can. They walked through the dispersing crowd. Ethan got there first, looking up at Victoria with his mother's eyes and his father's earnest gravity. Thank you for helping my dad. He's a really good doctor. Victoria's voice cracked when she spoke. You're welcome. I know he is. I wouldn't be alive without him. Marcus extended his hand. Victoria took it, her fingers cold and trembling against his palm. The handshake lasted 3 seconds, maybe 4. A lifetime compressed into brief contact that said more than words could arrange. Thank you for the evidence, the lawyers, all of it. You don't have to. I know, but I'm doing it anyway. Ethan grabbed both their hands simultaneously, joining them in a triangle of connection that looked accidental but felt deliberate. Can we get ice cream now to celebrate? Marcus looked at Victoria. The moment stretched, heavy with every unresolved thing between them. I don't want to intrude. You're not intruding. Your family. Victoria's eyes filled faster than she could blink the tears away. Ethan continued with the casual certainty of someone too young to understand the weight his words carried. Mom would have liked you. Dad told me. She always said people deserve second chances. Marcus's throat closed around words that wouldn't come. He nodded instead, and Victoria understood. She did say that. Almost exactly those words. Then I'd love to get ice cream. They walked out together into December sunshine that felt warmer than it had any right to be. News crews were camped outside, but Marcus's lawyer, pro bono, arranged by Victoria though she'd never admit it, intercepted them while Marcus and Victoria and Ethan slipped out a side entrance. They found a small shop 3 blocks away, the kind of place that had been there 30 years and would be there 30 more, where the owner recognized tragedy and triumph when he saw it and gave them a corner booth without asking questions. Ethan ordered chocolate with rainbow sprinkles. Marcus got vanilla because some constants anchored you when everything else was shifting. Victoria ordered nothing, then changed her mind and got strawberry. When Ethan looked disappointed, she wasn't participating. They ate mostly in silence, comfortable rather than awkward, the kind of quiet that came after storms when everyone was too exhausted for a performance. Eventually, Ethan started talking about school, about a science project on renewable energy, about how Tyler had apologized for the black eye and they were friends again, sort of. Marcus watched his son animated and unafraid, watched Victoria listening with genuine interest, and felt something unknot in his chest. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but the acknowledgement that forgiveness might be possible eventually, that the story wasn't finished just because one chapter had closed. 6 months passed in the way time does when you're rebuilding, slowly at first, then accelerating until suddenly it's June and the world looks different than it did in December. Marcus spent January studying, relearning protocols that had changed, techniques that had evolved, medications that hadn't existed when he'd last held surgical privileges. February brought interviews at 3 hospitals. March brought an offer from St. Augustine itself, attending pediatric surgeon, salary $285,000, full benefits, choice of surgical team. He almost declined. The thought of walking those hallways again, of operating in rooms where he'd once been resident and then pariah, felt like volunteering for emotional archaeology. But Dr. Hughes called him from Arizona with advice that bypassed his objections. Marcus, honey, going back isn't about erasing what they did to you. It's about proving you were bigger than what they tried to make you. Take the job. Show them who you are. He took the job. Part-time, 2 days a week, because Victoria's clinic was under construction and she'd asked him to be chief surgeon, and he'd agreed with the condition that the clinic be named for Rebecca, and Victoria had agreed so quickly he suspected she'd planned it all along. The groundbreaking ceremony happened on a Tuesday in March. Local news covered it perfunctorily. Billionaire CEO funds free pediatric clinic. Feel-good story to balance darker headlines. Marcus stood beside Victoria while a mayor he'd never voted for praised their partnership and vision. Ethan dug the first shovel of dirt, grinning so hard his face looked like it might break. By June, the building was finished. 3 stories of glass and steel and hope, with a mural painted across the front facade. Massive angel wings spreading 40 feet wide, children playing beneath them in scenes of health and joy and second chances. The artist had worked from descriptions Marcus provided, trying to capture what Rebecca would have wanted, what those wings on his chest had always represented before they became shorthand for everything he'd lost. The dedication plaque read, Rebecca Kane Memorial Pediatric Center, founded Tweetum, dedicated to the principle that every child deserves healing, regardless of their family's ability to pay. Marcus's first day back in a white coat felt surreal. He stood in an exam room designed to his specifications. Natural light, walls painted soft blue, toys in every corner, everything calibrated to reduce a child's fear of medical spaces. His name was embroidered over the pocket, Dr. Marcus Kane, MD, Chief Pediatric Surgeon. Victoria appeared in the doorway wearing khakis and a clinic polo, her CEO wardrobe abandoned for something more practical. She'd resigned from Ashford Industries 3 months ago, taking a position as operations director here at 1/10 her former salary and apparently 0 regrets. How does it feel? Strange. Good strange, but strange. You'll get used to it. Will I? This feels like someone else's life. Victoria stepped into the room looking at the space they'd built together from mutual guilt and tentative hope, and the grinding work of actually following through on promises. It's yours. You earned it. Every patient you see, every surgery you perform, every child who walks out of here healthy, that's you taking back what was stolen. Their first patient arrived at 9. Carmen Rodriguez, 6 years old, heart murmur detected during routine screening. Her mother, Maria, sat twisting her hands while Marcus examined the girl, listening to the telltale whoosh of blood flowing backward through a faulty valve. She'll need surgery. Mitral valve repair, same procedure I specialized in. Maria's face went gray. How much? Nothing. That's what we do here. The woman started crying, relief and disbelief mixing into something that looked like prayer. Marcus knelt beside Carmen's examination table, meeting the girl's scared eyes with the calm certainty he'd learned in residency and refined through hundreds of surgeries. I'm going to fix your heart, Carmen. You'll be scared, and that's okay. But I promise I've done this before, and I'm very good at it. 2 weeks later, Carmen's surgery took 6 hours. Marcus's hands remembered everything. The precise pressure needed to suture valve leaflets, the rhythm of working with surgical nurse and anesthesiologist, the hyper-awareness that made time slow down until he could see individual heartbeats, measure angles in fractions of millimeters, trust his training absolutely even when the outcome mattered absolutely. The surgery was successful. Carmen recovered faster than predicted. Before discharge, she drew a picture. Marcus with angel wings, standing next to a little girl with a heart drawn in red crayon over her chest. He framed it, hung it in his office beside the photo of Rebecca. By October, the clinic had seen 156 patients, performed 12 surgeries, charged $0. Marcus worked 6 days a week, 2 at St. Augustine, 4 at the clinic, and came home exhausted in ways that felt right, that felt earned, that felt like he was finally paying his skills forward instead of letting them atrophy from forced disuse. On October 18th, the anniversary of Rebecca's death, Marcus drove to Riverside Cemetery with Ethan in the passenger seat and Victoria in the back. She'd asked if it was okay to come, and Marcus had said yes because Ethan wanted her there and because grief shared was sometimes easier than grief carried alone. The cemetery was quiet at 8 a.m., mist hanging low over grass that had gone autumn brown. They parked near the eastern fence where Rebecca's plot overlooked a small pond and a stand of oak trees that reminded Marcus of their wedding venue a lifetime ago. Her headstone was simple gray granite. Rebecca Marie Kane, beloved wife and mother, 1985-2018. Ethan placed white lilies at the base, then knelt with his hand on the cold stone. Hi, Mom. Dad's a doctor again. He helps lots of kids. Last month he fixed a girl's heart, and she drew him a picture, and he cried when he thought I wasn't looking. I think you'd be proud. I'm proud. Marcus stepped forward, placing his hand beside his son's. Hi, Becca. I'm sorry it took me so long to get here. I wanted you to know we're okay. Ethan's growing up strong and kind, and I'm not stuck anymore. I'm living again. I'm helping again. I'm remembering what it feels like to be useful. He kissed the cold stone, then stepped back to give Victoria space. She knelt slowly, placing her hand on the grass beside the headstone, speaking to a woman she'd never met but whose absence had shaped both their lives. Mrs. Kane, my name is Victoria. I never got to meet you, but I'm the reason your husband lost everything. I can't change that, but I promise I'll make sure he and Ethan are never alone, that they have everything they need, that your husband's skills help as many children as possible. Thank you for teaching them what strength looks like, what forgiveness looks like, what love looks like even when the world makes it hard. They walked back to the car in silence, Ethan between them holding both their hands. At the cemetery gate, Ethan looked up at Victoria with Rebecca's eyes in a question that carried more weight than 11 years should be able to generate. Are you going to stay with us? Like, not leave? Marcus looked at Victoria over his son's head. They'd never discussed this explicitly, never defined what they were to each other beyond donor and recipient, destroyer and destroyed, two people bound by scar tissue and second chances. But somewhere in the last 10 months, something had shifted. Not romance exactly, but partnership, alliance, the recognition that healing was easier together than apart. Your mother would want that. She believed people could change if they did the work. If they earned it, Victoria's voice came out steady despite the tears on her cheeks. I'm not going anywhere. Not unless you want me to. Ethan grinned, satisfied, and ran ahead toward the car. Marcus and Victoria walked side by side, not touching but connected, two people learning how to build something new from the rubble of what had been destroyed. At the car, Marcus looked back one last time. The mist was lifting. Sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating Rebecca's headstone in gold. A bird landed on the granite, perched there for 3 heartbeats, then flew away toward the oak trees. She approves. Victoria followed his gaze. How do you know? Because I can breathe again. Because Ethan's happy. Because yesterday I saved a child's life, and it felt like coming home. Because sometimes the only way forward is through forgiveness. And I think I'm finally ready to try on. They drove back toward the clinic, towards surgeries and consultations, and the grinding work of building something that mattered. The radio played classical music. Ethan fell asleep in the back seat. Marcus's phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Hughes. How are you holding up today? He typed back one-handed. Better than I expected. Worse than I hoped. Grateful anyway. 2 years later, December 28, the clinic held a ribbon cutting for its second location in South Boston. Marcus and Victoria stood together while photographers captured images that would run in the globe under headlines about redemption and second chances and the complicated mathematics of justice. Ethan, now 13 and shooting up like wheat, stood between them looking uncomfortable in dress clothes and proud in ways he was still learning to express. Senator Ashford had funded 30% of the expansion anonymously, a fact that wouldn't stay secret but which he'd tried to keep quiet anyway. He stood in the back of the crowd, older and frailer than 2 years ago, watching his daughter cut a ribbon and his daughter's, what, partner? Friend? The man she'd wronged and tried to make whole again? Watching Marcus smile for cameras and answer questions about their mission. After the ceremony, after the speeches and the tours and the obligatory photo opportunities, the 3 of them drove back to Marcus's apartment. He'd moved 6 months ago to a better neighborhood, three-bedroom unit with actual heat and windows that closed properly. Victoria had her own place still, penthouse in Back Bay because some habits were harder to break than others. But she was here 3, 4 nights a week, falling asleep on the couch after helping Ethan with homework, or arguing with Marcus about clinic budgets, or just existing in the same space like family did. They ordered pizza, the good kind from the North End, and ate around the table while Ethan talked about his application to a summer science program and whether Marcus thought he could get a recommendation from one of the surgeons at St. Augustine. Victoria listened with the attention she once reserved for investor pitches, asking questions that showed she actually cared, laughing at jokes that weren't particularly funny because the laughter mattered more than the humor. After Ethan went to bed, Marcus and Victoria sat on the couch with coffee that had gone lukewarm and a silence that felt comfortable instead of weighted. Outside, Boston moved through its December rhythms, cars honking, sirens in the distance, the eternal motion of a city that never quite slept. "Thank you." Victoria looked at him, surprised. For what? For not giving up, for doing the work, for proving that sometimes people really can change if they want it badly enough. She set down her mug, her hands folding in her lap in that precise way she had when emotions threatened to overflow. "I didn't have a choice. Living with what I'd done, what my family did, was worse than whatever humiliation came from admitting it. You had a choice. You could have let it go, protected yourself, moved on. You chose the harder thing, only thing that felt like living." Marcus reached over and took her hand, a gesture that 6 months ago would have felt impossible but now felt natural, inevitable, right? They sat like that for a long time. Two people who'd hurt each other and helped each other and learned that healing wasn't linear, wasn't easy, wasn't anything like the stories suggested, but was possible anyway, if you were stubborn enough and brave enough and willing to sit with discomfort long enough for it to transform into something else. The clinic opened Christmas Eve to families who couldn't afford to take their kids anywhere else. Marcus worked a 12-hour shift, performing 2 emergency surgeries and seeing 16 patients in consultation. Victoria ran intake, coordinating with nurses and social workers, making sure every family left with referrals to food banks and housing assistance, and whatever other resources might help them survive the season. Ethan volunteered as a patient escort, guiding scared children and exhausted parents through the building, explaining procedures in terms a 7-year-old could understand, because he'd spent years watching his father make medicine feel less frightening. He wore scrubs that Victoria had ordered specially in his size. And when Marcus saw his son moving through the clinic with purpose and compassion, he had to step into a supply closet to cry for 2 minutes before collecting himself enough to finish his rounds. On Christmas morning, they drove back to Riverside Cemetery. Snow had fallen overnight, covering Rebecca's headstone in white that Marcus brushed away with bare hands too cold to feel the temperature. He placed a wreath of evergreen branches and white roses, Rebecca's favorites, and stood there with his son and the woman who'd destroyed him and saved him, and spoke to his dead wife about the life they'd built from the wreckage. "We're okay, Becca. We're actually okay. Ethan's growing up good, strong and kind, and so much like you it hurts sometimes. The clinic is helping people. I'm helping people again. And I met someone. It's complicated. It's not what we had, but it's real and it's good, and I think you'd understand." Ethan added his own message, private words Marcus didn't try to hear. Victoria stood back, giving them space until Ethan turned and motioned her forward. "She's part of this too, Mom. She's family now." "That's okay, right?" Marcus's throat closed. He nodded because words were impossible, and Rebecca's grave sat silent in the snow, and somewhere a bird sang despite the cold. They drove back through Boston's empty streets, past houses bright with lights and families visible through windows, past churches where people gathered to celebrate birth and renewal and the persistent human habit of hope. At Marcus's building, they trudged up 3 flights because the elevator was broken again, and piled into the warm apartment that smelled like the coffee Victoria had programmed to brew before they left. Ethan disappeared into his room to call friends, to video chat about presents and plans, and the ordinary concerns of 13-year-olds whose fathers were no longer falling apart. Marcus and Victoria stood in the kitchen, not talking, just existing together in the kind of peace that felt earned rather than given. "I have something for you." Victoria produced a small wrapped box from her coat pocket. Marcus unwrapped it carefully, preserving the paper because Rebecca had taught him that rituals mattered, that treating gifts with care honored both giver and receiver. Inside was a key. To what? The clinic. I had them make you a master key. Full access anytime, day or night. It's yours as much as mine. More yours, really. I just fund it. You make it matter. Marcus turned the key over in his palm, feeling its weight, its promise. Everything it represented about trust and partnership and building something larger than either of them alone could create. Thank you for all of it, for not letting me disappear. Victoria's eyes filled for maybe the 100th time that week. Thank you for letting me try, for not hating me forever, even though you had every right. Marcus pulled her into a hug, brief, awkward, profound. When they separated, both were crying and neither apologized for it. The rest of Christmas passed in the kind of ordinary magic that only exists when you've survived things that should have destroyed you. Board games that got too competitive, a dinner that burned slightly because they were distracted arguing about clinic expansion plans. A movie nobody paid attention to because Ethan kept pausing it to show them science videos he'd found interesting. By evening, Victoria was asleep on the couch, exhausted from weeks of managing clinic logistics and board meetings, and the 1,000 small fires that came with actually doing the work instead of just signing checks. Marcus covered her with a blanket, then stood looking at this scene. His sleeping son, this complicated woman who'd hurt him and tried to heal him. The apartment that finally felt like a home instead of a way station between catastrophes. Ethan emerged from his room in pajamas. You love her, don't you? The question caught Marcus completely unprepared. He looked at Victoria's sleeping form, at the way exhaustion had softened her face into something younger, more vulnerable, less defended. I don't know, maybe. It's not like what I had with your mom. That was first love, building something from nothing. This is different. It's built on wreckage and guilt and trying to make something good from something terrible. But you're happy? Marcus pulled his son close, this boy who'd survived so much and remained so steady, so certain that love was possible even after loss. Yeah, buddy, I think I am. Are you? Ethan nodded against his father's chest. Mom would be happy too. She told me once that the best people are the ones who mess up bad and then do the hard work to fix it. Victoria messed up bad, but she's doing the work. When did you get so wise? Probably watching you, Dad. They stood together in the warm apartment while Boston settled into Christmas night, and somewhere in the cemetery, Rebecca's grave sat quiet under snow, and the clinic they'd built stood ready for tomorrow's patients, and the story that had started with coffee spilling on marble and a man on his knee and wings hidden under thin fabric continued into its next chapter. Not happily ever after because life was messier than fairy tales, but healing slowly, one day and one choice and one act of forgiveness at a time.